Okay, hi everybody. I know we don't have much time, so I will try to be prompt. Also because I'm coming from Switzerland, so I've learned about the importance of Swiss punctuality. But I'm originally American, so sometimes the punctuality is not so easy for me. But so I'll start. My name is Miley Wynn, and I am part of a company called Roche. We are drug developers, and we have been working in the Huntington space for a number of years now, and we are very proudly working on multiple different programs that are looking at different ways to try to help Huntington's disease. So my role is I'm in global patient partnership, so similar to Jacozy for those of people who were here in the earlier session. And my job is how to help create ways that the HD community can partner with us and we can partner with the community on our different programs and ways that we're engaging. So specifically, we're talking about clinical trials today, so we very proudly have been collaborating with the community since the beginning of our programs. I see here some faces where we were working with them and introducing even the idea of doing some of our large phase 3 studies together at that time. But so today, why we're here, we're actually not going to be talking about any specific program, because when I was speaking with Jenna, we were talking about, you're going to get so much information today. Maybe we can take some time and just talk about some of the terms and things that you might experience if you happen to participate in a trial, or you might even volunteer to be a study companion. So first, though, I will start with our disclosures. So the three of us who are here today, we are employees of Roche, but this presentation does not actually include any content about any specific drugs or drugs being in development, but I want to make sure that we cover this important slide. So I told you we had been talking about Jenna, and in the conversations, I had asked her, like, what could be important or what could be particularly interesting? And she actually shared with me the community survey that happened middle of last year, and there was a question about what are topics in research that people have perhaps a lot of knowledge about or not so much knowledge. And here, actually, this topic of endpoints was, you can see the big blue circle here, was a term that people felt that they had low or no knowledge of. So we thought an opportunity to just come together and spend some time to help maybe demystify some of this. So with that, I'm actually going to pass over to my colleagues Peter and Jonas to go through the next sections to talk about these terms, help demystify, and when each of them come up, I'm actually going to ask them to explain their role at Roche in a way that most of you will be able to understand, and then we'll also have questions at the end as well. So with that, I'll pass it.
Thanks, Miley. Hi, everybody. My name is Peter McColgan. I'm a global development leader at Roche. I'm also a neurologist. I've been working as a Huntington's neurologist for more than 10 years now as well. And I'm delighted to be here to be able to talk to you about clinical trial endpoints. I think Rachel did a really amazing job this morning in describing research terminology, but we're just going to focus on this area. So let's start with clinical trials. So why do we do clinical trials? What questions do we need to answer when we're doing clinical trials? Well, first of all, if we have a drug that may have a potential in Huntington's disease, we need to know if the drug works. Does the drug make people feel better? Maybe it could slow the progression of the disease or stop the progression of the disease. We also importantly need to know if the drug is safe and if it has any side effects. And so this is where endpoints come in. So endpoints allow us to set goals when we design clinical trials of things that we want to meet to really answer these questions and to show if the drug works, if it's safe, if it has any side effects. So There are 3 different things that we can measure. But first of all, it's important to appreciate that over the course of a clinical trial, trials typically last about 1 to 2 years. So you have a relatively limited time when you can test these things and try to find answers to these questions. And there are 3 different things that we can look at, as I said. So we can look at things called, we can look at what's going on inside the body. These are typically biomarkers. We can look at the symptoms or clinical signs that people have. We can also look at what happens in day-to-day life, and this is really function. And importantly, we need to use validated clinical measures. So these validated scales means that there are ways of assessing that everyone does in the same way. So a doctor in one site or in one country will do it in the same way as a doctor in another country. Importantly, regulators such as the FDA in America need to be on board with these clinical scales as well. They need to see them as robust and reliable. We also need to predefine these. So even before we start the study, we need to predefine these in a protocol. And the other, perhaps one of the most important aspects, is we need to speak to the HD community, to patients and families, and get their input into what is most important and most meaningful for them in day-to-day, so that we can try and measure that and include this in our study. So let me now take you through each of these 3 different aspects and explain them in more detail. So measuring things inside the body, we can look at blood, so we can do blood tests. We can also look at cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is the fluid that bathes the brain and the spinal cord, and you can access this via lumbar puncture, which is just a small needle into the back where you can take off some of the fluid. So we can look at something called neurofilament light. I know this was discussed this morning as well. Neurofilament light is a protein that we can measure both in the CSF and the blood. That protein increases over time as HD progresses. But in clinical trials, they can typically tell us if something is going wrong, then the protein likely goes up. And if something's going well, then the protein may go down. So it's a good indicator of what's going on in the body. We can also measure brain structure, and we can do this using magnetic resonance imaging. So we can, and this is essentially what people refer to as a brain scan. So we can do a brain scan at the start of the study, and then we can do it at different intervals across the study. And so we can measure things like the different brain structures getting smaller. That's called atrophy. And ideally in a trial, we would hope that we could slow atrophy. And again, this could be another measure to indicate that the drug is doing something good. And again, very importantly, we need to collect data about safety. So typically, when a patient comes in for a visit, we'll see if they've had any side effects and try and understand could they be related to the drug, or at least the doctor or the site will make that assessment. Okay, so let's move on to how we measure symptoms and clinical signs. So you may have heard about this before, the total motor score. This is really a head-to-toe assessment of motor function. And this is something that we do as a HD physician in the clinic, but we also do this in trials. So we can measure things like eye movements. So some of you may have had this done before, where the doctor will ask you to move your eyes this way and this way. We can measure things like finger tapping. We can measure coordination by moving your hand. We can look at you walking, and we can also look at things like chorea, which are the irregular movements that people with HD can get. The other assessments that are really important in HD are cognitive tests, and that's because HD affects motor and cognition. Cognitive tests are really how people think. There are 2 specific tests that we use in HD that are specific to the disease. So HD typically affects your speed of thinking, and it can affect executive function like planning. So strip word reading is when you read words of colors as fast as you can. That taps into speed of processing, so that's one of the ones that we use. Symbol digit modalities test is when you match symbols to numbers. And again, we time how fast you can do that. and that taps into speed of processing as well and a bit of executive function. So these are both very useful tests that we use specifically in HD. Okay, so let's move on to measuring function, things that impact day-to-day life. So the most common thing we do here is measure the total functional capacity score. This is 5 questions, and it's a 13-point questionnaire. And we ask things like ability to work, look after your finances, ability to wash and dress, look after yourself, and things like this. So this is valuable in understanding how the disease impacts day-to-day function. A relatively newer measure is called the Composite Unified Huntington's Disease Rating Scale, which is lots of words, but I'll try and break it down. So it's essentially a combination or a composite of 4 tests, the 4 tests that I've mentioned. So total functional capacity to measure function, total motor score to measure motor, stroke word reading and symbol digit modalities to measure cognition. And by combining these 4 tests together into a composite, we get a holistic view of how someone is doing. And that can be sometimes more sensitive than looking at the measures separately. The important thing to say about these measures, though, is with HD, people can have good days and bad days. And when we see people in a clinical trial visit or in the clinic, we really only get a snapshot of how people are doing. So Jonas is going to talk after me about the digital assessments, but I think he's first going to talk about how we classify endpoints. We can talk about primary, secondary, and exploratory endpoints. So I'll hand over to Jonas to go through this. Oh, you've got it.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm Jonas Dorn. I'm working at Roche as Peter and Miley's. Together with my team, I'm working on developing new ways of measuring disease and disability so that we can better understand how well our drugs are working to help impact the lives of patients. So practically speaking, we'll have people like Peter come to me and say, Jonas, we need to have a better measurement for Huntington's, and then I and my team will try and figure something out. As Peter said, but before we go into how we're figuring something out, let's talk a little about what we need to actually try and make. Namely, Peter has introduced to you a number of different ways how we can measure Huntington's disease, and so when you are designing a clinical trial, you then will need to pick one of those measures and make that your primary endpoint. And that means you are going to say, okay, my therapy is going to beat a placebo, like if you were to do nothing, is going to beat a placebo by this much. And if then you're beating that much, right, that's where you can show that the drug works, and if you don't, your trial has failed. So picking the right primary endpoint, it's a big responsibility. Now, something we've heard in that survey that Miley's mentioned was that a number of, some of you were saying, well, some of those primary endpoints that people are using, they don't really speak to me very much. They don't seem to be quite as relevant for my personal life. And that's not such a big surprise because you're not the target audience for the primary endpoint. The primary endpoint is really the target audience for that are the regulators, the health authorities, because they will need to approve, for example, for whether the drug is, again, safe enough and efficacious enough to be approved. And as Peter has already mentioned, they have a number of criteria about what they want to see. For example, in a phase 1 study, they want to see the primary endpoint is about safety, whether it is safe enough to that you're allowed as a company to continue administering this drug in further clinical trials. Whereas, for example, in a phase 3 study, so that's the third usually of the sequence of studies that you do, there is it about efficacy. So is this drug making enough of an impact? It's not just sufficient that it's just a little better. It needs to make enough of an impact that it's allowed to go on the market. However, the primary endpoint is not the only thing that we're measuring in a clinical trial. So there are so-called secondary endpoints, and those are intended to be usually complementary to the primary endpoint to give a more holistic picture of how the drug works and how it benefits people. And that's, those are usually, can be more, immediately relevant or impactful for also people like you. In addition to the secondary endpoints, there's also the so-called exploratory endpoints. Now, those can be measures that are maybe they're newer. So for these measures for which we may not already know by how much our treatment should beat placebo. So we can't already use them like secondaries, or they can also be measurements that may not tell us directly something about the therapy, but tell us more about the Huntington's disease itself, so that we can use them to benefit further programs down the line. Now, whereas for the primary endpoint, there's limited flexibility in what you're going to choose, because the health authorities are reasonably quite conservative about what they want to accept or not. The study teams have more flexibility in choosing their secondary and exploratory endpoints, and this is also where patient advocates, the voice of patient advocates, will play a role in what we choose and where we put the weight. And with the new endpoints that I and my team are developing, we usually start on the exploratory. As exploratory, and then hope that if they work, if they perform well, they will make their ways inward. Now, why did Peter come and ask for better endpoints? So why did Peter ask for better endpoints? I mean, there's two key challenges that we have with some of these measurements that are done in the clinic. One is that, as Peter already said, Huntington's disease is variable. The way you may present from day to day is not the same, depending on the shape you're in on one day or another. And the other problem is that doctors are not machines. And so for the first, to address the first problem, right, because if there's some day-to-day variability, what would be really great is if you could measure over multiple days, not just on one single day, and if you maybe indulge a little much on like the good Czech beer or so, you might not perform quite so well at the clinic, right? If you can do spread the measurements over multiple days and then average, we get this sort of day-to-day variability out of the system, and we see much more clearly what the status of the HD is. And on the other hand, as I was saying, doctors are not machines. When you do the finger tapping, the doctor will look at that, interpret it, and then write a score down on the scoring sheet. And that is great in principle, as the doctor is, if you're using this as a doctor who's looking after you and treating you on accompanying you on your journey. But within a clinical trial, you may have different doctors taking your measurements on different visits, and all of them interpret the same thing slightly differently. Again, they're not measurement machines. And then you also have many different doctors across many different sites within the clinical trial. And what we would like to have is that we measure directly from the patient and not have to go take these detours sort of via the doctor's mind for the purposes of the clinical trial. And so the tools that we're using for this are digital tools. These can be either mobile phones where we have an app installed, and there you would, for example, do the tapping on in the app, and with that, right, you can directly capture the actual taps, right, on the system. So there's nobody needs to look at your taps and counter interpret them. The other thing is asking study participants to wear something like a smartwatch or so that keeps track of your movement and of your sleep, so that we can better see how the disease impacts your everyday life. And as I was saying, that right, because when we hand a mobile phone to people and then they can do these assessments at home, right, you can spread the data over multiple days and you can average. And as I also said, right, by capturing the data directly, again, you're making it much more consistent across all the different, for everybody, right? Everybody's measured exactly the same way. And so what we've done and this is right. So this is a general approach that we're taking with our measurements. Now, what we've done specifically for Huntington's, we developed a whole suite of assessments, including the cognitive tests that Peter talked about, including motor tests that are similar, based on the total motor score. Right, these are all based on what is done in the clinic, so that we would know when we see a signal, like how we need to interpret that. And then we've deployed this across several different Roche studies, as well as an academic study at UCL. And people with HD then have contributed data across all of these studies, some of them for up to 2 years. And they were doing some of these tests every single day. This has created a amazing data set, and we're incredibly grateful for everybody who has put in all of their time, even if maybe at some point after doing this for 1 year, 1 year and a half, some of people started to get a bit fed up with it, but they still powered through and continued to collect the data. And what this allowed us now was then to look at all of these data and ask, okay, can we use fewer assessments? And can we maybe ask people to not have to do this every single day throughout the trial, but only on 3 weeks here, 3 weeks there, several months apart, so that also the burden becomes a lot more bearable? And the answer is yes. We find that if we just take 4 motor assessments, so this is speed tapping, where you're tapping on the phone, and we'll have phones at the table, so you will be able to try those out if you're curious. But it's this speed tapping, so looking at the finger tapping. There's a chorea test looking at sort of how steady you are holding your arms over time. There's a balance test to look at how much sway there is. And then there's a 2-minute walking that just looks at the walking pattern. With these 4, if you combine these 4 measures into one single score, we call it the Huntington's Digital Motor Score, we can have a measurement that is a lot less variable from visit to visit than what we have with, for example, the CHDRS. And here you see on orange, this is the visit-to-visit variability of the CHDRS, and 100% here, this is the average yearly progression that you would expect. So you see that actually over a short period of time, there's quite a bit of fluctuation in the measurement. And with the digital, it is a lot more narrow. So we're able to, and because of this, right, we're able to see a lot more sensitively what is going on with HD over time. And what this promises us is that we may be able to see treatment signals earlier, or already with fewer people. And because of this promise, that this may help us really make better decisions in the future. We are now having these digital measures in the SPARK gene therapy trial that Jacosi, I think, talked about. We will also include it in the Roche's HET-SNP-ASO trial that's scheduled to start later this year. And we're talking to several other pharma companies who would also like to use it in their trials. And of course, we're very happy to support them with that. And with this, I'd like to hand back to Miley's.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonas. We'll just click it once more. So that ends our presentation. And so just to kind of start back at why we're here, we hope that this whistle-stop tour through Endpoints helped maybe change some of the feelings of knowledge. So if Jenna sends out this survey, we can help have moved some of these answers to the other side. And with that, though, I would welcome you to ask any questions. We still have a few more minutes. First, I just want to thank you for attending this session because it's really, I know, a lot of information that is coming to you this Congress and also as you consider for yourself or your loved ones getting involved with research. And then I will say that, so we do have a couple phones with us as well, and we're over at table 11B, which is right next to Spark, and happy to have you also try out some of these tests, do the speeded tapping, as well. So with that, what kind of questions can Jonas, Peter, or myself answer for you? So yeah, why don't you guys head up there? I'll run around with the... Yes.
Oh, there's stairs. Oh, goodness.
Is there, are they using this HD digital measuring scale in trials yet, or is it pretty new?
How new is the HDDMS? Is it being used in trials now?
So HDMS is in some ways very new. I mean, the actual assessments have been we have been collecting data on these digital assessments since 2018. However, the digital motor score that we built on these data from these 1,000 people with Huntington's disease, this we have. So we finished the analysis, I would say, about a year ago, 2 years ago. Yeah, about. I mean, we of course continue and now, like, you know, we won't always want to need more. So 1 to 2 years ago, and so right now, as I said, in Spark, we are collecting now data for very varied counts.
Oh, sorry.
Would it make sense to use the HDDMS app, like for all of us to collect data we could use, like the animal studies type?
So what about bringing the app to the real world outside of clinical trials? Is there value in that?
I think there is, but as with every data collection, you want to be very sure that you're collecting data for the right purpose, and that you are also ready to analyze all the data that is coming in. Right, just collecting data for the fun of it, it wastes everybody's time. So when you are going to do such data collection in the real world, roll it out, you will need to make sure that you have a big enough team that is ready to support everything and to make sure that the data gets analyzed. And I would love to see that. I think my expectation is that it will take a few more years, just so, because now we're putting it, again, it is in the Spark trial, it will be in the Roche trial, it will be in some other companies' trials. And then when people see, okay, yeah, this really works, right? This also really tells us something about, strongly about HD. I think that is where we can make the case that we should make this more broadly available. There is in Parkinson's disease, for example, the Michael J. Fox Foundation has rolled out some similar things like this, and I hope that we will be able to, in the future, follow suit.
Do you think eventually having this sort of a run-in might be a good way of identifying when somebody might be ready to start a treatment?
I think that's a very interesting question, right? I mean, what one could with such an app see is, possibly we may be able to see kind of like earlier on when symptoms may actually start, whether or not you want to make this a gatekeeping, some sort of kind of a gatekeeping thing in the end, this we'll have to see, right? This is always a balance between how much do you need to make, how many hoops do you want people to have to jump through in order to be able to get treatment, and yeah, this is. For the moment, it is in the future, but you could also you could imagine having this as a sort of like something like this as sort of mini assessments that we would do maybe on a more regular basis, and then if something changes, then you would go to see your doctor. Again, these are possibilities for the future, but yeah, well, first we want to have a good treatment.
Great. And I think we have time for, well, Peter answered, there was time maybe for one more question.
I was just going to add, I mean, I think, as Jonas says, if we can show that this is, in the hope that you have a therapy that shows benefit in a trial, and you can see that the HD-DMS is responsive in a trial. I mean, I think looking, further on in clinic when you have, even now when you have symptomatic drugs in clinics, things like the HD-DMS could be used to understand treatment response and, guide, for example, in clinic when we use antipsychotics to treat chorea, it could guide you in terms of dose escalation and things like that. So I think that's one application as well that could be used. And, potentially even alongside things like NFL, having those measures in clinic would be really valuable.
Any final I'm getting my steps in today. So the question, I think this is to Peter. So for choosing exploratory endpoints, can patient organizations have influence on how companies select them?
Very much so. So what we do when we're designing a new study and writing our protocol for a new study is we have lots of interactive meetings and sessions with the patient community, patient organizations, and it's essential for us that we get input from patients and families because, of course, you guys understand the disease better than anyone else. So I mean that's a crucial part of our process in designing a trial.
One key more question. And maybe on a side note, one thing is the creation of the CUHDRS, so that was something that Roche helped lead, was actually partly because of listening to the community that HD is different in so many people. So like, why are you picking one measure instead of looking at it all as together? So.
Very simple question. Are there any plans to add HDMS to enroll, so to start collecting data in natural history as well? As that seems a logical process in your way of thinking.
I think that's a great idea. I think we'd be really interested in exploring. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Charlotte. Is there anything?
I got one question, and it's: have you looked at including sleep into your app?
Thank you. Yes, so very much so. So in the app itself, this is for active tasks, but with the passive monitoring. So with when people are wearing a monitoring, like a activity monitoring device, as they are doing in the, for example, in the Spark gene therapy study, there, yes, I mean I've been very much, Peter knows it. I've been very much an advocate for tracking sleep because I do think this is really important. In HD and working on other diseases, like sleep has never let me down in terms of showing me a signal.
I was going to add to that as well. And I mean, sleep is a massive, it can be a massive issue for patients in the clinic. So we're very, very conscious of trying to understand that alongside everything else. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. So I understand it's now a break and lunch. So please feel free to exit. And we will be over at the table if anyone wants to try the app.
You guys didn't even need me.